Good morning. It is wonderful to be here with all of you, and I want to thank the Urban League and Mark Morial, your CEO. Let's give it up for Mayor Morial. Highest title in the land, Mayor. I want to thank your CEO for inviting me to be here with all of you today. My name is Martin O'Malley. I am the former mayor of Baltimore, former governor of Maryland, and I'm a Democrat, and I'm running for president of the United States. You know, Mayor Morial and I will always share a certain bond of having served as mayors together of two of America's oldest and greatest cities, the revolutionary cities of New Orleans and Baltimore. Mayor Morial and I have discussed many issues over the years. Some people are called to work in the gap between justice and injustice. How to rebuild our cities. Baltimore is now growing rather than shrinking. How to improve our schools. In the middle of a recession, we invested more, not less, to make our schools #1 in America 5 years in a row, and to make college more affordable for more families by freezing college tuition 4 years in a row. How to create jobs and opportunity for all. In our state, we have the second highest percentage of African American owned businesses, and we have the second highest median income for African Americans of any state in the country. And then the topics that I would like to speak with you about today. How can we save lives? How can we improve and reform our criminal justice system? And how, together, can we make real the promise of equal protection under the law? When I ran for mayor of Baltimore as a long-shot candidate way back in 1999, it was not because our city was doing well. Despite many well-intentioned efforts, our city had become the most violent, the most addicted, and the most abandoned city in America. And every year, we bury 300 young black men who died violent deaths on our streets. And Black Lives Matter. I'd like to share with you a true story from my time in service in those turnaround years of Baltimore. Difficult but important years. It was October 16, 2002, and the phone by our bed rang at 3 a.m. and it was loud and insistent. And I suppose one can get phone calls with good news at 3 a.m. But as a mayor, calls at that hour never have good news behind them. On this night, Deputy Mayor Gene Hitchcock had the rotating duty of screening emergency calls. Mayor, Gene said, there's been a fire, a really bad fire, in a house with a mother and we think 5 children. And the father's real bad too. He's in intensive care, very badly burned. Awful, I said. But there was something in Jean's voice that night that told me the story was not over. Mayor, she said, police and fire are here, and they believe it was intentional, and they are very shaken up. I'm here, neighbors are here, and they're very angry, and they say it was retaliation. I said, retaliation? By whom? For what? Gene said, for calling the police about drug dealers. This is so terrible. And indeed it was. In my 23 years of public service as a Baltimore City Councilman, 2 terms as governor, 2 terms as mayor, the tragic events of that early morning are forever seared into my memory. The reality was this. Parnell and Angela Dawson lived with their 5 children in a row house at the corner of Preston and Newton Streets on the east side of Baltimore. Mom and Dad both worked. They loved their children, provided for them, reveled in their individual talents and ways. But like so many families in so many neighborhoods in our city in those days, They were threatened, they were harassed, and they had life in their own neighborhood made miserable by open-air drug dealing. They would call the police to complain. Mrs. Dawson would dutifully go to court to testify. 2 weeks later, someone had, or rather 2 weeks earlier to this incident, someone had thrown a Molotov cocktail through the Dawson's living room window. The bottle failed to explode. Police responded. There were no witnesses. State's Attorney's Office and Housing offered to move the family, but the Dawsons refused to be driven from their neighborhood. Eastern District Police put on extra attention, and on this early morning at 1:20 a.m., the district major even rode by. Now, like many families in humble neighborhoods who have a hard time making ends meet, the Dawsons were keeping their home heated that night by leaving the gas oven open and on. And at 2:20 a.m., a 21-year-old young man from the neighborhood, more of a lookout than a dealer, lit the rag that topped the full glass bottle of gasoline, kicked in the Dawson's door as the family slept, and tossed the bottle inside, where it smashed on the stairs. The old row house was engulfed in flames in seconds. Everyone in the house died quickly and painfully, except for Mr. Dawson, who clung to life for 2 more days. I stood in a line a couple of days later with the good people of East Baltimore as we filed past the tiny little caskets at March Funeral Home, the kids' school portraits atop them. As the perpetrator was brought to federal trial, get this, Angela Dawson's mother and other relatives made clear to the federal prosecutor that they did not want to see the death penalty pursued. They did not want to see these deaths lead to one more death, and life without parole was imposed. To this day, it is impossible for me to think about the Dawsons without becoming very sad and emotional. And I suppose it always will be. Now, their little house became our Alamo. It would be our beginning or our end. The Dawsons are buried together at Delaney Valley Cemetery, the same resting place of so many of Baltimore's fallen black and white police and firefighter heroes who have given their lives in the line of duty. And every time I visit that cemetery on Fallen Heroes Day or other occasions, I'll walk just over the hill to the Dawson's grave, and I still wait in hope for love and peace and justice to have the final word. You and I are part of a living, self-creating mystery called the United States of America. Our country was not born in perfection or without original sin. Because of the sacrifices and perseverance of so many in generation after generation, we have moved toward a fuller respect for one another. We have moved toward more equal justice and more equal protection under the law. But we are not there yet. Every headline or video of official abuse, injustice, indifference, killing or murder reminds us of how far we still have to go. Every story reminds us that Americans of color must endure a constant state of random vulnerability, even when they're just driving to work. And all of us must ask, how many individuals, like Sandra Bland, have been subject to abusive arrest when the cameras were not rolling? How many names will we never know? How many Walter Scotts have been savagely shot down and then set up to take the blame for it when cameras and cell phone technology were not in the on position? How many names do we not know? There are certain beliefs we share as Americans. A belief in the dignity of every individual. A belief in our own responsibility to advance the common good. And an understanding that we are all in this together. In our idea of country, there is no such thing as a spare American. As Americans, we believe that you do not surrender your human dignity when you change lanes without signaling. As Americans, we believe that you do not surrender your human dignity when your tail light on your car happens to burn out. And no American surrenders their dignity, whatever the emergency, because of the color of their skin. And if you do not believe that, you are not qualified to run a city. And if you do not believe that, you are not qualified to wear a badge or carry a gun. Leading my own city and my state forward to achieve the largest reductions in violent crime in modern history, we strived and searched every day to become smarter about public safety and the actions that actually work to save lives and to redeem lives. The constant search for better ways shaped our approach to courts, to prisons, to increased drug treatment, to policing the police, and everything else we did. From 1999 forward, 1,000 fewer black men died violent deaths in Baltimore, thanks to the biggest 10-year improvement in public safety of any big city in America. In my first 52 days into office, I closed the largest and most notorious and violent prison in the state of Maryland, called the Maryland House of Corrections. And by the time I left office as governor in January, we had not only reduced violent crime to a 35-year low in Maryland, but we took actions that reduced recidivism by 15%. We reduced our incarceration rate to a 20-year low, and we reduced new prison admissions by 19% compared to 10 years before. How? By doing the things that work, like expanding reentry programs, not cutting them, like dramatically increasing drug treatment and mental health treatment, like expanding education and workforce training inside the wall, like giving ex-offenders an ID card before they are released from prison so they can apply for jobs and housing and benefits afterwards. We also did this by doing away with the things that clearly do not work and clearly do not serve. For example, we decriminalized the possession of small amounts of marijuana. We restored voting rights to 52,000 citizens with old felony records. And not on our first try, and not on our second try, but with perseverance and on our third try, we repealed the death penalty in the state of Maryland. In our party, we have lots of good candidates who will make progressive promises. Lots of people that can talk about criminal justice reform, but I have actually done it. Today I want to talk with you about a new agenda for criminal justice reform for our entire nation. Policing will always be locally controlled and locally directed. But there is a vital role our federal government must fulfill in setting standards, funding programs that serve the larger cause of justice and the common good that we share. We can reduce racial disparities. We can reduce and redirect dollars that we're currently spending on incarceration, and we can give more of our people opportunities to turn their lives around. First, our laws must allow punishments to suit the crime. And Congress appears to be making progress to reducing mandatory minimums for nonviolent crimes, and I support this important bipartisan and long overdue effort at the federal level. As president, I will root out the mindless sentencing disparities like the one that still exists between the possession of crack and powder cocaine. And as president, I will work with all to forge a consensus that leads to the repeal of the death penalty in America and removes the United States from that small group of nations responsible for a majority of the world's public executions. Second, I will take actions to put the work of rehabilitation at the center of our justice agenda for the sake of employment. There is no progress without a job. Our nation currently has the highest incarceration rate of any nation in the free world. We must recognize that investments that we make for re-entry pay for themselves by reducing recidivism. Our federal government must expand investments in re-entry programs, job training, help in securing employment, and we must support community services that help people return to their families and make the transition back to productive life. To that end, our federal government must lead by example in banning the box so past criminal record does not prevent a person who's paid their debts to society from gaining employment. Third, we must recognize that many people who fall into our criminal justice system would be far more effectively helped by our public health system. And yet, police are often our first responders to people in crisis. So as president, I will invest in training and equipping law enforcement to better prepare our officers for encounters with our neighbors who are suffering a mental illness. I will dramatically expand our federal commitment to drug treatment and community health services. Fourth, and finally, we must improve policing and the way we police our police in order to rebuild trust. When I ran for mayor of Baltimore in 1999, I was not endorsed by the Fraternal Order of Police. In that election, I promised for the protection of both our neighbors and our police officers that we together as a people would do a much better job of policing our police with better recruitment, better training, better pay. That is exactly what we did. There are things every police department should do every day to improve the trust necessary between citizens and the police officers who are sworn to serve and protect us all of us. Among those things, an adequately staffed internal affairs division, an independently staffed civilian review board, reverse integrity stings to safeguard professional integrity of every police force. And our federal government can play a vital role in lifting up these practices and advancing their adoption across the country. Today, every police department in the nation reports the 7 federally measured UCR crimes, among them murder, rape, robbery, and reports them timely, accurately, and in a public and open way. As president, I will require every police department to report all custodial deaths, all incidents involving use of lethal force, and all complaints involving discourtesy and excessive force. It is a fact of human nature. We cannot understand what we do not see. We cannot improve what we do not measure. But once we measure, and once we see, and once we understand, we can certainly improve. The reality is that racial injustice and law enforcement in America have been painfully intertwined since the very first days of our nation. If we are to have any hope of improving police and community relations in America for our own sakes and the sakes of our children and grandchildren, these measures of professional policing must be open and visible for all to see. We must also advance the deployment of new technology like body cameras, cruiser cameras that promise openness and transparency and accountability. And technology, we know, will not fix everything, but it is a vital step forward to achieving accountable, respectful, and professional policing. We must free ourselves from the tyranny of that's the way we've always done it. Every police department must pass the test of whether it saves lives. And every policy that we adopt in public safety must pass the same test. Are we saving lives? Are we redeeming lives? And this really is the ongoing work we share as a nation, isn't it? To do more of what works and less of what does not. To create an America where there is truly liberty and justice for all. Final thoughts. The great Barbara Jordan once said, "The gap between the promise and the reality of America can one day be finally closed." We believe that. Barbara Jordan grew up amidst some of the harshest segregation in our country. Denied everything from the use of a water fountain to admission to her state's university. But she never stopped believing that we could make the promise of America a reality. She became the first African American in the Texas Senate since the days of Reconstruction. First African American ever sent from Texas to Congress. And there, she fought for voting rights and human rights and what was right. One of her very first acts in Congress was to advance a funding and reform effort to strengthen Prairie View A&M, which happened to be the school where Sandra Bland was to work. The school where Sandra Bland never made it to work on July 10th. Barbara Jordan was fond of saying that when it came to justice, people who are right must do battle with people who have the might. When Barbara Jordan passed away, not yet even 60 years old at the time, the Houston Chronicle headline read, "A voice for justice dies." I don't believe that's true, because voices for justice never die. Voices for justice will always resonate. Sandra Bland told a police officer she couldn't wait to get to court so that her voice would be heard. And we are hearing her voice right now. We can make ourselves a more just nation, a more compassionate nation, a more just people. We can teach all of our children a more generous, compassionate, and caring way forward. There is more that unites us than divides us. We must help each other if we are to succeed. And love, peace, and justice will have a final word. Thank you all very, very much.
Governor Martin O'Malley, Governor, very quickly, questions. And I'll ask all three of you to respond to all three at once. We will be sending you a questionnaire, and I want you to commit to responding to the questionnaire on a timely basis. Second, talk about the role of young leaders, an emerging generation, and as to what role they'll play in your campaign, in your administration, in the future of the country. And the third is an element of income inequality and the racial wealth gap, or what happens with the frozen markets and small businesses and African American businesses face, and how you would, and what you've done to expand opportunity there.
Great. Mayor, thank you. First of all, yes, I will absolutely, with zeal and speed, fill out the questionnaire, and I look forward to having a larger discussion in the course of this presidential campaign about the new agenda for America's cities, the investments in workforce, affordable housing, mass transit, as well as making our cities leaders in this new clean green future. Secondly, on young people, our headquarters in Baltimore is packed every day with a very cool group of young men and women representing the great strength of our country, our diversity, and they keep it going. And as I've traveled around the country and you talk to young Americans, I rarely meet people under 30 who deny that climate change is real or think that we should do something about it. I rarely ever meet people under 30 who want to discriminate against gay couples or want to bash immigrants. So that tells me we are moving to a much better place as a country. And I'm going to speak to that better America that we're headed to. And I think you're going to see a tremendous response. And a lot of leaders come forward in the course of this campaign. And the final point, as mayor, as soon as I was elected, they struck down our MBE and WBE case. So I had to put it back into place right away. And I did it with an executive order that actually raised it higher while we did the study. And we put in place a way to measure our outcomes, and actually as governor we raised our MBE goal out of a legacy from Karen Mitchell. Maryland has the highest MBE WBE goal in the country, and we actually exceeded it in the middle of a recession. So we as a people have to walk the walk when it comes to understanding that the genius of our nation is that in every generation we take actions to include more of our people more fully in the economic, social, and political life of our nation. So when we actually make opportunities, loans, business startups, our state has the second biggest percentage of black-owned businesses of any state in America. So we have to take actions if we want economic growth in this country.
Governor Martin O'Malley, thank you for being here. We'll see you back again, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so we just heard remarks from Governor Martin O'Malley. He talked a lot about some of the same things that you heard Hillary Clinton speak about, the emphasis on racial justice and some of the other same things. I am going to return back in about 5 minutes because we have a break. We have 2 more candidates up. I thank you guys. I saw that a couple